Good morning, boys and girls. I woke up late today, which is weird for me, and so I'm running on about 20 minutes and a half a cup of coffee, but we'll get going. I've got Larsen J with me. He is the, I forgot what the title is now. It's the anyway, we'll talk about that. Chairman of the, there we go. We'll talk about that and some other stuff, and hopefully I'll wake up before we get too far into this. I'm working my way through the commission. We've got the Board of Health. We got baseball. We got 1,000 different things going on, and we're going to take some time to get to know Larsen a little bit and then see what's going on in the community. So let's get the intro music out of the way, and welcome, Larsen. I appreciate you stopping by. And you said chairman?
I'm currently serving as the chairman of Knox County Commission, yes.
The chairman of the commission is the actual title. Like, I don't know. I was thinking about it last night, and then I forgot it this morning, obviously.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I'm one of the two at-large commissioners, so I represent all of Knox County, so I don't have a particular district. I have the whole community, and happy to serve.
Gotcha. And I had Biggs last week, who was the other at-large.
Yep.
Nystrom, who was the chairman, was my commissioner when he was here. When you replaced him. So how long have you been on the commission?
I'm in my third year now.
Okay. So what led? Like I said, we do little mini bios. What got you in? What made you make the leap to not to just get into the community in general, but in politics, and then take the next step up into actually leading the commission as opposed to just being a member?
So I got into county commission, after, well over a decade of serving in different capacities in the community, and being involved with lots of different community initiatives and leadership organizations. I mostly got involved. It was actually a long time ago when Hugh Nystrom ran, and he and I knew each other. And so I learned more about, our local government through engagement with him. And then I learn more and more about how important local government is. It seems to be all the stuff that dominates everything is on the national level, but really the stuff that impacts our lives the most is on local level. And really it just it presented an opportunity for leadership when the two at-large seats came open, and a few people asked me if I'd consider it, and I, long story short, got involved and said, here's an opportunity to be helpful to the community, and I'll see what I can do to be helpful. And so I went from virtually never being involved in a more formal capacity anywhere in local politics to running at large, and now serving across the county.
Excellent. So are you party affiliated? I guess you have to be for a commission race.
Yeah, Republican.
Okay. So we run in the same circles, and to your point, that's kind of what I'm doing what you did, but instead of getting into the front end of politics, I'm getting in the back end on what I'm considering, if I'm so bold to consider myself media. But because I agree, that was one of the things that me and some of the other guys that do the show with me regularly and stuff like that, we talk about a lot. We talk about how we don't hear local politics, we don't see local politics. If we do, it's the specific issues, and we will talk about those. Like the Board of Health one right now is a big one, but that's about all you ever hear out of the News Sentinel or one of those that's going on in the commission. There's so much other stuff going on, and like you said, local politics is so important, yet we can't. I know we talk about it specifically, and then we can't help ourselves with talking about the next stupid thing Pelosi and McConnell are fighting over, even though like we're trying to stay local. The prevalence of national politics in the media is hard to avoid, to try to stay on topic on local stuff and how that applies to us. And so that's a big thing for us as well. So I've alluded to it a couple times. So let's talk Board of Health. You guys are workshopping today?
Tomorrow.
Oh, tomorrow. It's holiday. Duh. Happy Martin Luther King Day. I apologize. So workshops tomorrow, and then next week's the vote, and that would be the second vote if it's not postponed.
Correct.
And if I recall correctly, you were one of the nays. Were one of the nays on the first round?
I was, yeah. I've been pretty vocal in that. I think there's two sort of arguments in his. So part of it's structural and part of it's philosophy. So let me take the second part first. I've just been a vocal opponent of dissolving the Board of Health for a number of different reasons. One, I think having the discussion right now while we're in the middle of the height of the pandemic it's poor timing. I've talked to doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals on the front lines, and they can't understand why any amount of time is being spent on fighting over um, a logistical argument or a political argument when every day they wake up and go to the front lines and just try to keep people alive. And I've said many times, if you're going to have this discussion, fine, let's talk about it, the proper structure of government, but let's do it in the summer or next fall. Let's get through this and spend all of our time and focus on getting through the pandemic now. I also think that, structurally, boards of health were set up like this for a reason. It's to keep it out of politics and to keep a consensus of professionals that are focused in different parts of health to come together and make decisions collectively instead of putting everything on one person's shoulders and then ultimately having that person report to a mayor who can make decisions to hire and fire that person whether they like it or not. And public health officials in general and public health experts, to me, are better suited than politicians to make decisions when it comes to large public health decisions. There's 100 more layers to that, but those are sort of the big arguments about why I didn't think it was a good idea to dissolve the Board of Health. And then structurally, I personally have a disagreement with how the ordinance is structured. I think the state law reads pretty clearly that if you have a Board of Health, here's how it's structured. And if you don't have a Board of Health, the only people that can create an advisory Board of Health are the public health officials. In this case, Dr. Buchanan or the state health officials. I don't think county commission has the authority to do it. And so I think it's a bad idea. I don't think we have the ability to do it. But at the end of the day, the one thing county commission does have the ability to do is to dissolve the Board of Health, which is what this ordinance does. And this is the second reading. I think it also has a huge ripple effect beyond the sort of philosophy and structure of what it says about our community. And optics in politics and messaging is important, and I think it can't be ignored. And I've said several times, think about a company that is thinking about relocating here, or a family that's thinking about relocating here, and they read, in the height of pandemic, in one of the worst spots in the country, Knox County dissolves or undermines or guts its public health infrastructure. That sends a message to people. And I think that there are other ripple effects that doing this now really has a negative effect on our community. So for all those reasons, I've been an opponent of it, and we'll continue to listen to all the arguments, continue to read all the emails, but likely we'll be in the same boat come this month.
Right. And I follow what you're saying. Like the confusing part for me trying to track this now for 6 months that I've been elbow deep in it is the way the structure works, because it's a state mandated board. And so that's what's been really confusing to me, because I was sitting there in that 7.5 hour epic meeting, listening to all the arguments and stuff like that, listening to talk about it, and was doing some reading on it on my phone before my phone died because I was there that long. And I was trying to figure it out. And the more I thought about it, it's like, well, this is a state level conversation. And, again, I'm all for the public forum, but like, I don't, and this, I guess, is one of the issues in that I'm hopeful to help as we grow as a show, is that I don't know that half the people, or even the majority of the people that were on the public forum saying their piece, understood what they were actually asking for. And
no, I agree with that.
Or understood that this was actually a state level issue, and this needs to go to now Manus and Massey and Zachary and all those different people are the ones that can actually do what everybody was actually asking for. Everybody said this shouldn't exist. We shouldn't be here. Non-elected body making elected or making legal decisions that we have to live under, that kind of stuff. And I get the argument, but at the end of the day, you're arguing to the wrong body. And
exactly. And that's where we started. We started by saying, look, this is a state level issue. And the issue is, if the state says this, if you have a Board of Health, here's how it's structured, and here are the powers and duties, argue to the state. And people have said this is unconstitutional, and it's a constitutional argument. I've said, okay, well, show me a court case where somebody has said this is unconstitutional for the last 25 years. I mean, it's existed for decades.
Right.
Show me one case in which when you have a constitutional argument and you say something is illegal or unconstitutional, you take that to the courts. The courts look at all the information, and they make a ruling. That, I mean, these boards of health have been around for a long, long time. I think what's gotten confused is I think that many people trying to dissolve the public health board of health, and sort of undermine public health they don't like being told what to do, in my opinion, and they don't like being put any restrictions on anything. And so the way to get rid of the restrictions is get rid of the whole thing. It's very much I feel like it's micromanaging the fire department in the middle of the wildfire, or
Right.
saying who has the authority to pick up the hose and start, doing work. And it's just, it is, I'm happy to have the conversation. I'm not excited about having it right now. It sucks up all the oxygen in the room, and it diverts all of our efforts to fighting over a state level issue on a local level. And it has dominated our time, and the amount of time and energy spent on this is every bit as much of what we could have been doing, working on other things to help.
Right. But what I think is really interesting about it is if you kind of look at it a little bit more abstractly and take the specific out, it is kind of an analog for politics at large right now. Like anything, and it seems more prevalent through the pandemic, regardless of what it is. But it's like the vitriol that people at the level of anger and rage and people crossing that line between voicing their opinion and doing something stupid like death threats or any of the other stuff that's going on. It seems like that's our local version of Stop the Steal or the different stuff that's going on around the country. There's that disconnect at large in the more abstract version is what concerns me moving forward in watching politics, is that this is becoming normal. That this kind of action from the citizenry to their elected body, these interactions, the elected body doing certain things that they do, but this level of again, vitriol is the best word I can think of right now, or animosity from portions of the constituents to their elected bodies is getting out of hand, and it's really concerning to me.
I agree with that, and I think that one of the things that is really difficult, I've always said, what you ignore, you endorse. And the more this becomes normal play that people don't, push back on or disenfranchise, sort of disengage from, it becomes normal. It becomes the way to yell and scream and hate and send death threats and you wouldn't believe the stuff, the emails we get, just the vitriol of one, I don't think they understand the argument, and two, you are immediately the enemy, and regardless of your conversation. I mean, here's the thing: if you step way, way, way back on this conversation, the original argument was these unelected bureaucrats are making decisions that affect our lives, and I remind them, people that have that argument, there are thousands and thousands of people that are unelected that make decisions every single day. And some can trace back directly to an elected official and some can't. I mean, if you look at all of what public health is and look at what the health department does and everything that falls under public health, there are literally hundreds of things you interact with on a day-to-day basis that they mandate, and everyone agrees that this is part of a good common society. Seatbelt laws, child restraint laws, DUI issues, your elevator safety, the botulism, and food storage in your local restaurant. I mean, there are literally dozens and dozens of things, and there are hundreds of boards in this country of people that are appointed that make decisions. I mean, the SEC, the FAA. I mean, you could go on and on and on and on about people who make things that affect your life. And I think one of the things that I've said from the beginning of this: don't ever mistake liberty for selfishness. I think those are two different things. And I think that you got to, as a society, we got to really understand what are the collective norms that we've decided are part of what we do as a society, and what is an attack on my personal liberty. And I think those lines have gotten really, really muddy lately.
Right. Because I think that's the Board of Health thing in general. It's like, this isn't new. Like, cause that's one of the things I was trying to figure out. I was trying to figure out if like part of this was under the state of emergency, their authority changes, but no, this is how it's been.
It's been like this for 20, 30 years.
Right. And just now we have one that's so front and center and somehow so divisive that it changes the whole conversation about whether they should or shouldn't exist. And I probably fall into the side of selfishness and liberty or something on that in that case. I don't like the idea. I respect what does I respect what it is and why it exists and stuff like that. But there is it does concern me when we have a large body, because one of the questions I asked Biggs last week, and you've been on the board or you've been on the commission a little longer, how many different boards and bodies does the county have that you guys appoint people to? Like, because I had a conversation with
Dozens.
you're right, and I'm truly curious to know that. Is there a resource on the commission page or in the county page somewhere that I could look up all these different boards and bodies and see what they are? Because I can know there's a library board and
Yeah, there are. There on the commission page. There's several breakdowns of different boards that we serve on, and then I think there's a list of other ones. We also go through. We just went through an annual review, or not an annual, but we just went through a review where we kind of looked at all the things we appoint to. But we appoint people to utility boards who set rates on how much you have to pay for water. We land use boards. Air quality boards, public health and safety boards. There's committees, there's board, there's a ton of people that we say here is a need, and we look for people in the community that might serve in those capacities. We look at their credentials and their qualifications, and we say, we need not that 11 people can't do it all, and
right.
So you got to build a group of people that have the opportunity to serve and bring their expertise to the table.
Okay, so that does kind of naturally bring us to one of the things is to jump into the Sports Authority baseball conversation. Has there been any discussion yet on how we are filling the Sports Authority?
That is ongoing right now. We have not. The mayors essentially come together and put those appointments together. And so, again, just to kind of reset, whenever you're working on a stadium project like this, for taxing and financing and logistical and legal reasons, you essentially form a sports authority. This is sort of a governmental entity in and of itself.
It'd be a new board on the list of boards that we were just talking about.
Yeah, and right. So you populate the board of that sports authority with people who are subject matter experts in business or finance or entertainment or sporting or a number of different things, and then from then you create the plan in order to go forward with what is a stadium project and how that's used.
Right, because it's a very fun conversation, and for what's left over of air in the room after the Board of Health conversation's over, this seems to take up the next block of oxygen, and I will take the opportunity to take a little bit of that air too.
Sure.
I've been talking to a lot of people about it. I had I just blanked out his name. There's a Facebook group called Nats. Eric Waiter and a couple guys are heading that up, and they're against the taxpayer funding of it. But trying to stay in the realm of reality and what's going on is the first real thing. Now that the Sports Authority is official, is that correct? Are we officially on the Sports Authority?
Sports Authority, both governing bodies, the city and the county, have agreed to form a sports authority. And then the next part of it is to populate the board and then to work through the details of that. I talked to somebody who recently called me and was against, the idea. I think back to the beginning of our conversation, it's so much of what people's response to is either what they've heard or what's been posted on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and they don't really understand the guts of what that means and what is the structure,
right?
Basically, and I asked, he went on and I just sort of listened, and I asked him, I said, do you ever go see a basketball game? And he said, yeah. He said, I said, where do you go for that? I said, Thompson Bowling Arena. I said, okay. And you go and you drive. He lived up on the north side of Knox County. I said, you drive downtown. Yep. Do you go out to eat beforehand? Yep. Do you spend money at the game? Yep. Oftentimes get, merchandise outside, da, 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 da. And I said, are you glad that Thompson Bowling is a part of our community? Absolutely. And I said, what else have you seen at Thompson Bowling Arena? And he said, well, I went to the fishing tournament there, a little while ago, and I went to a concert, last year before that, and on and on. I said, so do you think that it's important that we have Thompson Bowling as part of our community? He said, yeah. I said, okay, that's called civic furniture. Okay. These are the assets that we have that attract people to our city, whether they are attracted to live here or to travel here, or to spend money here, or to be part of this community. Those are pieces of our civic furniture. And that civic furniture might be an arena. It might be a park. It might be a waterfront. It might be a dock. It might be, I mean, there's a World's Fair site. There are pieces of our civic furniture that make up our home. And we say that's attractive to people, and these are things that we believe in. I said, okay, so go back to Thompson Bowling Arena. I said, do you know who helped finance Thompson Bowling Arena? He said, well, I assume the university. I said, yeah. You know who partnered in that? Knox County. So in 1983, I wrote this down today, I did a little research. In 1983, Knox County guaranteed $10 million in public bonds. It was a $30 million project. It was the state of Tennessee, University of Tennessee, and Knox County. And so it was a 20-year financing plan, ended up being paid off early, actually. But Knox County did the same exact thing that we're talking about with the stadium. It guaranteed, it was sort of like the co-signer on a loan. It guaranteed those bonds up to $10 million to say that this is an important part of our community and our civic furniture. And then we use that asset to attract all kinds of things. And when you think about a stadium project, it's not about one person. It's not about one person that owns a baseball team. Now, that is an anchor tenant. But when you talk about a stadium project, it's about what might be baseball, what might be soccer, what might be concerts, what might be event venues, what might be rental venues. It's that piece that we say, we believe this is something that will make our community better, and we're willing to put some financing guarantees behind it. And so that's sort of a long answer, but we've done this 100 times before, and some of the best assets of our community are done with public funding.
Right, and I don't disagree with you on any of that, because that is the conversation. Does what's our return on said investment? What is our return as a county on the investment in to this private organization, which has its own little kind of kinks to it, and that freaks people out, and I understand why it freaks people out. But I mean, backing up to the beginning of it is do you know, is it going to be just the mayors assigning this board, or is it going to be an open?
The way it's structured, the mayors come together and sort of agree on here's who we'd like to propose.
Okay.
And then the governing bodies, just like many of those same structures we've talked about, their nominees are suggested, people are appointed, and then we confirm them. Both bodies would look at that and say, is this person,
but it's not going to be like the Board of Health one that I took part in, or even the advisory board that's kind of in the works for the new Board of Health thing that's going on. It's going to be just the mayors pick some people and they come. So it's
a nomination and confirmation process, which is pretty common for almost every board we do.
Okay. That was just where the curiosity is to be, because because that seems to be where we are in the process, I guess. And that's what I was trying to clear up.
Yeah.
So
and when you look at these types of projects all around the country, I haven't seen one that is not done with some sort of on any level without some sort of public infrastructure resources. I mean, these are not private entities, because then the private person who owns the team, they don't own this. They don't own this. The community owns it. And so you could look at every stadium from top to bottom across the country, and it is a very similar model. You have some public resources that you either guarantee or put to bear, and then you have a lot of private industry and private resources, and then you have people that have tenants and infrastructure.
Right. Well, see, I'm a big Packers fan, as you can tell, and we do it all weird. The city actually owns the team as well as all the facilities and stuff like that.
Packers are a whole different world.
Right. But that's one of the I don't know. That's one of my favorite things about one of my many favorite things about my Packers, and they won this weekend, so it's an even better weekend for that. But yeah. So I mean, I'm finding that conversation very interesting, just to kind of watch it play out, because there's plenty of evidence where it's not wasted money per se, but there's plenty of evidence that you can find where, for one reason or the other, the team doesn't make it, and the municipality ends up holding the bag on these bonds and whatnot, and has an empty stadium that there's nothing, because there's not a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, but those are pretty rare circumstances.
Right.
And, I always tell people, okay, find me 50 businesses and business plans and show me where 50 out of 50 work. Okay. It doesn't, a perfect scenario doesn't exist. And so you have risk and reward. You sit down, you look at the finances, you look at the logistics, you look at, all of the elements, and you decide, is this worth us taking, a moderate amount of risk on, or is it, I also ask, what's the alternative? We usually, these types of projects, they are driven by private enterprise, because that's where people have money to risk. And so you think about, I say, okay, tell me another entity that's interested in, investing $150 million in East Knoxville. Show me another plan for this area. Show me an alternative, and let's, have that discussion. But it's usually, I'm just against it. And being against everything is not, it's hard to start. In government, it's, people come to us all the time, I don't like that idea, and we go, okay, tell me what you would do differently. Well, I don't know, but I don't like it.
Right. I get
Okay.
it. Yeah. And it's, I mean, I guess the question for me is, if we spent the same amount of money as the joint municipalities on a more direct thing instead of something so specific in the same area, could we get a similar result? That'd be the only possible alternative I can think of off the top of my head, but I'm not.
The difference is, you have a tenant that is willing to come in, an anchor tenant that's willing to come here. If you build it, I will bring the team here.
Right.
You could build it with no option for that, but I would much rather build a spec building, just like in any business. I mean, look at Easttown Mall. Easttown Mall is going to be redeveloped into, a multi-use distribution facility. You had somebody who said, if you'll do X, Y, and Z, I will bring this many millions of dollars of investment in jobs. And that person doesn't build it hoping a tenant will show up. That person builds it,
right, knowing he has a tenant in line, right? Because it's more guarantee for yourself. But okay, well, let's move off of the two big air topics. I don't. This is the problem, as I don't know what else is going on. I saw a snippet. I didn't get to read the whole article, but I saw a snippet about there was a controversial property that was rezoned for some purpose recently. It may have been inside the city. It may not have been a commission one.
It may be the one on Beverly Park. I don't Beverly. We do so many. Here's the thing: is this is probably back to where we started our conversation. There are so many things of sort of how the sausage is made every single day that we do that almost nobody pays attention to. There's so many people that don't even understand. We have a city government and a county government. What are the roles and responsibility? Who does what?
I'm on a long argument against. I'm trying to. I'm a pro metro person. I'm not a pro metro person, but I'd like to see somebody put together a proposal of what metro would look like.
Well, we've been doing it for 30 years without a proposal. It's as the city's gone out of business to different things, and the county. We used to have 2 health departments. We have 2 school systems.
Right. Right. That's kind of my thought process on it. Is we've slowly been doing it. Different chunks are getting merged together, and
library systems, things like that. Yeah.
Right. And it's at what point? I guess to me, it's there's an eventuality to it. Like eventually, we will be one government inside the county. The city and the county will operate together. It's an eventuality. Eventually, all these different things are going to squeeze together for logic's sake. I would like to see somebody just go ahead and write it out and say what it would look like if we just went ahead and shoved it all together.
Tried that 2 or 3 times, and it's not working. But back to the sort of politics of things, it's interesting. The atmosphere we're in, to me, feels like Danby principles. As long as I win the day, it doesn't matter. I mean, there are a lot of people that are willing to. As long as I win this fight, I don't care if I burn the whole house down.
Right.
And I said this very publicly in the last. This ties to the Board of Health. Is 6 months ago, a core group of people in our community, when we were getting ready to have our summer election, we had a referendum on the ballot to either appoint our law director or elect our law director. And a core group of people in our community said, we're the only county that elects our law director, and we're smarter than all other 94 counties. And so they do it wrong, we do it right, and we should keep this because we know best, right? And they fought for that, and they defeated the idea of appointing a law director, and so they kept it elected, right? The exact same group of people 6 months later are saying, why do we even have our own board of health? We should be governed by the state, just like the other 94 counties. Why are we smarter than all other 94? Right. And so principles don't seem to matter anymore. It's how do I win this argument? How do I win this day? And how do I win this fight? And then I go to the next fight without even thinking about what does it mean for a bigger process. And I think that's it's kind of where we are right now. And so there's 1,000 things that we do at every commission meeting nobody pays attention to. I remember being at a commission meeting a couple of years ago, and it was one of our former commissioners, and he said, you guys are arguing about this, and we just spent $140 million of taxpayer money, and nobody asked a question, and we've spent an hour on this one little decision.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting. I sometimes things get a lot of attention, and they're in the bigger context, really small decisions, and sometimes things that are huge decisions nobody pays attention to.
Right, and that's that, and I fall victim to the hype of it, that's how we've had our whole conversation so far, is the hyper excited, maybe partisan, but not really in this case. But and I fully agree with you. I think that's
partisan though. That's the thing, is like in county government, I find 90% of everything we do is not partisan.
Right.
It's land use. It's fixing the road in front of Betty's house.
I mean, and again, I haven't gone back and looked at all the different votes per se, but it does seem that Dasha and Courtney are always together, and then 3 or 4 on the Republican side are always together, and then there's a handful that kind of wishy-washy back and forth. But that's
only on the Board of Health. Every other decision is that's what I say. Like literally 90% of everything we do is pretty much just it's public service and constituent services. It rarely gets into. I mean, I've rarely, even in 3 years, had even a thought of what does party politics have to do with this decision.
Right, and that's one of the things to me why we should be more interested in local politics, because it is more directly logical in what's going on. And so I guess the royal question that follows that to me is, so what do we do about trying to minimize some of the federal and state influence on what we're doing in the county and let us more manage ourselves? Because I think that's one of the big problems, Board of Health being one of the examples, is that I get that state has authority over us, but it gets so convoluted trying to keep track of who's where, what's what, who do I go to with this question. I have a specific one right now. I'm out in the county. I have septic. My septic system's starting to crap up, pun intended. And so I started making phone calls about how to fix it. And plumber tells me, well, if you have sewage, you got to hook up. And so I talked to KUB, and he's like, yeah. And then and state law requires that if sewage is available, I have to hook up. Right. And so I immediately call Manis and Massey and be like, hey, is this right? This seems a little funky to me that I have to go into business with a private entity to form my household, kind of thing. And it's like, if I wasn't doing this show, I wouldn't have the at least the
connection point. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Not even the connection point, but just the gusto, for lack of a better word, because it's content, and on top of it's actually a personal issue, to reach out to my state reps on a very specific thing. And they're so far, they've at least given me the, hey, let us look into it, we appreciate you reaching out, kind of thing. And I haven't heard back because this is a current issue. But just little stuff like that. It's like I've KUB locally here, I have to go through the state to argue whether or not I have to be with KUB and stuff like that, and trying to keep all these different pieces aligned as a normal person with a day job and kids and all the other different stuff.
Try being a commissioner with all that stuff. We have to be subject matter experts in about 30 or 40 different topics at any given time.
Yeah.
Everything else.
But at least through the bureaucracy part, you have a mountain of people that can help. I'm assuming you get a nice black book of who to get in touch with on certain items or whatnot.
Mostly we figure it out ourselves, quite honestly. Like we pay, but just like you said, we play information traffic cop.
Right.
A lot of times we get calls from constituents. Hey, who do I talk to? It's about connecting. Here's your issue. Here's your issue. But your particular issue about sewage is exactly the kind of thing where somewhere along the way somebody, a group of people said, as a community grows, more and more septic systems that may fail, equals more and more leakage of sewage into wastewater, which equals more and more, potential for E. coli into water systems, and da 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 da. So we're going to make decisions that say, as the community grows, we want the most sanitary way to deal with waste. And to do that, we don't want 1,000 more septic systems. We want less. And so those are bureaucratic decisions in which we collectively say
Right.
it's better for us to have less E. coli potential.
But I think you said earlier that you're on the, or that there are boards that have that the commission appoints people to the utilities boards and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that would be my question on the specifics of this issue. And this is where I get upset as a constituent. It's like, okay, I respect the premise. Septic is not as sanitary as sewage system, stuff like that. As far as I could tell so far, cost-wise, it's going to cost me about the same if I were to dig it up and put a new septic in, or the cost of getting a plumber out here and putting that and discounting the long-term cost of wastewater. That's going to end up $1 million over the life of my household or whatever. But like the specific issue I have on this one that bothers me is that KUB, the private company, that the state is telling me I have to do business with, is allowed to charge me to hook up to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where that specific on this one is what bothers me. It's like, okay, I get it. But, if that'd be like, I've been trying to think of a metaphor for this for a while, but it'd be like it's almost like it's like a door charge for the only restaurant in town. Like, you have to go to that restaurant to eat. It's the only place you can go get food, but you have to pay $15 to get in the door, plus the cost of your food. If again, it's a rough metaphor off the top of my head, but if the state mandates that you have to eat at this restaurant, then you should at least be able to get in the restaurant for free and then eat what you eat and pay for what you eat, not have to pay to get in the door on top of paying for what you eat. Again, right off the top of my head metaphor. I could spend a little time doing better than that, but that's the idea.
Yeah. No, there's probably 1,000 of those things that you go through and determine. Different states have different. You have to have insurance if you drive a car. Well, says who? Well, it says us, because we've decided that if you're going to operate a motor vehicle, then you have the potential. To me, it's all about where do you impact someone else.
Right. I get that, but the issue, again, just to push back a little bit, the issue with that one is I don't have to drive a car. I could live my life without it. It sucks and it wouldn't be as nice. I mean, you kind of have to drive a car to live, but for my work, I specifically do. But I have to live. I have to have a place to live.
But you don't have to live there. So that's the same as I don't have to drive a car. I don't have to live here. But if I choose to live here, there are certain things that, there are people that say, I want to live in Farragut. Well, Farragut has a whole nother set of rules than, say, Powell. You do not have to live in Farragut. You do not have to live where you are. But if you are going to live there are a certain set of things that are required by you. Same thing with zoning. Commercial zoning, residential zoning, agricultural zoning. These are things that constantly evolve. And I think one of the hardest things that we have is the land use discussion, because so much of our community is changing so fast that people say, well, this is, where my granddaddy fished for 50 years. Well, that was 80 years ago, and it's changed in the last 30, 40, 50 years. Where community changes and evolves all the time, and so we may make a set of rules and regulations and things that adapt to that constant change and constant need. So wherever you live, 20 or 30 years ago was probably not a high growth area, and now it is, and that's changed a bit. So I think the question is it unreasonable? In all of everything we do is what's being asked of us as a member of the society. Is it an unreasonable request, or is it an egregious request? And then, pick your poison. You can go down that rabbit hole any way you want.
Yeah. So. I mean, it's again, I acknowledge it for what it is. Like I said, I take issue with having to pay KUB to be part of their system when I'm being forced to be part of their system. So,
but you paid for your internet too. You paid an access fee for that, and they had to charge you to hook you up to.
But does
have this conversation right now?
Right, but does the did the city, county, or state mandate me to use an internet service?
I don't know. Did you have a choice of who to pick?
I had a couple, yeah.
Okay, some places don't.
Right. But that's what I'm saying. I mean, that's the difference. And because the other side too, if we're going to stay on utilities for a second, my business is in Powell and we're on Hallsdale, and like
Yeah.
literally we're a retail shop. I've got a handful of employees. If our toilet flushes 5 times a day and hand washing, that's all we do. We pay 80 something dollars, and all we
Yeah,
get from
it's
them is water. And it's like I get it. I understand the need to the state sanctioned monopoly that is most utilities, especially in power, water, and wastewater and stuff like that. It makes sense. We can't have 15 companies running gas lines and running sewage lines down the street because we'd never have streets because they'd be torn up every day because of different companies coming in and fixing and replacing lines. I get that, but if we're going to, as a community, say, okay, we're going to let this one company do it, well then the leadership of the community has to protect the community from that business, and they could be that business from gouging and taking money because they have the monopoly in place, or be poorly run and do a terrible job, and it's actually a decent cost. They're not charging through the roof to make a ton of money. They're barely paying their bills. Well, they're doing a crappy job then, and we need to figure out how to do something about that too. Because I don't know what the deal is with Hallsdale, whether they're greedy or whether they do a bad job. But the out here at my house with KUB and my water wastewater versus up there at Hallsdale, it's so painfully different. And it's like, how is it so much different? And I have friends that live up there because of the business and their home wastewater and stuff like that. It's just abysmal.
Yeah, that's a whole nother show of how utilities be in different districts and different rates.
Right. And for me, I'm like 15 minutes from First Utility, or Lenore City Utility Board pops in for just a little bit west of me. I'm far enough out in West Knoxville that I'm on the edge of different ones, but they all come out of TVA anyway, so it's not like they're just different local providers that go through the parent system. And and again, like there's this kind of assume that this monolith just moves and we all go along with what it needs. And I'm curious. I don't know. I'm not accusing that it doesn't exist, but I'm curious how much a commission or a mayor's office has the ability to push back on some of the things that these groups are doing in the utilities conversation.
Well, they have the ability to push back in some of those appointments of who ends up on those boards. But you got to remember, government is reactionary. It's very, very rarely proactive. So it's usually we wait till because there's so much going on all the time. You wait till something breaks or is on fire or enough of an uproar happens, and then you focus on how do we adapt, how do we reform, how do we change that system. It's pretty rarely ever hey, here's kind of an issue, let's see if we can make it better, until it's really an issue. It's
Right.
just too much going on, and a lot of people wonder about commissioners and sort of what our role is. I mean, you have to think about it, just like you said. Many of us have full-time jobs, full-time families, community obligations, all the other things. This is supposed to be a part-time leadership role with full-time responsibility on top of all that. And then you're supposed to be a subject matter expert on 30 to 50 things at any given time, whether it's land use or sewer issues or KUB utility rates or 5G or Board of Health or, stadium projects, whatever. And so the bandwidth in which we operate as a commissioner for basic constituent services is like this. And then you add any big topic like we have, and it just shrinks to zero. And so you do your very best to get as educated and engaged as possible. But, it's a difficult amount of stuff to dig into one subject and then go, hey, I'm going to really take on utilities. I mean, we all have passions in the community, but there's about 50 of those things that come up every single month.
Right. And so, okay, so to get more specific, what's been going on recently that isn't part of the big 2 or 3 that you don't feel maybe is getting the attention it deserves?
Well, certainly, I mean, obviously the pandemic and COVID has changed a whole lot of discussions. I think education and workforce development is always one that never gets enough emphasis until there's something that goes on. Like, that's always so reactive, and we constantly have, we have businesses and people saying, I need more labor, I need more people, and I need these kind of skill sets, and we're always playing catch up. I think the number one biggest issue that almost nobody talks about is how fast our community is growing and the infrastructure needs that we're not keeping up with. Our planning department has given us report after report that says 100 to 200,000 people will move to Knox County in the next 10 to 20 years. That's half our population, again, overnight. And we're not doing nearly enough to keep up with that. We're barely, keeping the skim coat on the basics of the roads, and we're just not getting ahead of what's the inevitable heart attack, where all of these veins are getting more and more and more clogged, and we're kind of reactionarily hoping to sort of patch it together. And at some point, we're really going to have a difficult time keeping up with how fast things are growing, and we're not talking about it nearly enough.
Right, because that's one of the things to me that I'm curious if the discussion is happening about. I mean, I fully agree. I could see it in the day-to-days. Just I could see us growing. I've got a friend that's a realtor, and he can't find enough houses to sell, that kind of thing. And he's just got he's got 100 people asking for 2 houses on the market right now and stuff like that. I've got a friend of mine who's trying to buy a house, and it's either so far out of his price range and move-inable, or it's a dump that he's going to have to rebuild with a newborn as soon as he moves in because of where things are going. And so I guess I'm curious, is there any conversations about growth in the idea that are we as a community comfortable with the fact that we're growing this fast? Or
depends on what part of the community you're in. If you're part of the business community, yeah, you'd want it to grow faster. If you're part of the real estate community, if you're part of the service-oriented community, HVAC, tree services, insurance, yeah, you want more customers and you want more. You want more. If you're in the education business, maybe not, because you're getting more and more strain put on your education system. If you're, I guess it depends on what your perspective, and all politics are local, and all local issues are based on how they affect your life.
Right.
And,
well, because that's, again, it's like, dude, like I've been a long proponent. I'm not like, I'm a UT grad. I respect the university for what it is in our community and stuff like that. But I've been a long arguer that UT has more influence on what the city and county does as a body than I necessarily agree that they should. And one of the ways to lessen their influence is to lessen their percentage of how much is going on around here. And so growth is a good thing to fight back against that. But the question I guess I'm trying to get at is, is there anybody having a conversation about, do we want growth? How much do we want to encourage growth versus it's just coming and we deal with it as it gets here?
Well, the answer is there aren't as many of those conversations that need to happen. Growth is one of those things that you can't control as much as people think you can. And you either have to prepare for it and shape it. I always say, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? And if you're going to be involved with something, figure out which way it's going to be involved. Because a lot of times when it comes to growth, let me just take a very basic thing. If you take land use, and somebody comes and says, I don't want that farm across the street to be developed into the next subdivision, because it's going to be too many traffic on the roads and too much pressure on the schools. And I don't want to look at it. It's going to be construction, and it's going to ruin my way of life because I bought here because it was nice and pristine. And so the first question you say, well, you could have bought that farm and kept it exactly where it was. That's what property rights are for. But at the end of the day, you live in a neighborhood that used to be the last farm. And
right.
The other guy used to live in the neighborhood that used to be the last farm, and so on and so forth. So, you don't get to be the last one in and close the gates and put the moat up. People move to where life is good, opportunity is ripe, and a quality of life is attractive. And so you have to shape it. You have to know it's coming. And when the planners say, look, here's the trend and here's where it's going and here's where it's happening, then you just have to see it and say, okay, what are we going to do to shape it into the community that we want? There's almost no circumstance in which it works where you say, I don't want growth. Sorry, we're all done here.
Right. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. I just, again, as far as shaping it goes, is it this 1 acre we could put 5 units on, or we can keep it to 2 units and stuff like that. Like, that's the actual planning part where those decisions get made on how dense we can put into a certain spot, which in turn,
it's policy of where do you want growth and how does that growth look? Those are growth policy plans and growth areas. And also, the rules and regulations around what can you build. So for instance, one of the big blockers in the last several years that I hope we'll talk more about is the policies around what can be built where when you get outside of the kind of urban core. Many of us, including me, would like to have more opportunity to encourage town centers and multi-use and different mixed-use growth versus just the next subdivision that's 3 units an acre. But there are things that are restricting that. So, you look at an area like North Shore Town Center that's built in a more unique way that's, more dense and higher and da-da-da. Well, you take that same concept, you take it to, say, Gibbs, and a lot of people go, well, in order for us to not have all of our farmland turn into sprawl, yes, let's have that. But then more people also come out and say, well, we don't want that because that feels more like a city and we like our rural whatever. And you go, okay, well, would you rather have your rural whatever turn into 1,000 subdivisions, or would you rather have tools to use that are more unique? And that's the battle we play all the time. Is you look at Cedar Bluff. Just take Cedar Bluff and look at Cedar Bluff 30 to 40 years ago.
Right.
Okay. In one generation, it went from farmland to commerce center.
Right. Because what I was
that's happening in Gibbs or Hardin Valley is farcical.
Right. Because I remember when the corner of Kingston Pike and Cedar Bluff there, both those corners were those farms that sat there forever.
Forever. Yeah.
Forever. And it was always like, how could, as the owner, like I'm thinking, I try to think it, put me like, if I own that farm, if my daddy or granddaddy and I inherited that farm generations ago, that's got to be millions of dollars worth of property at this point. That's just sitting there, and then a Kroger and a CVS.
Property rights is it's your right to do with what your land as long as it's appropriate for the greater community standards. But people forget, like, that might be somebody's retirement. That might be somebody's kid's college fund. That might be a next generation's opportunity to build wealth and opportunity. So just because it's always been a farmland doesn't mean that it's always ever going to be a farmland. Right. Those farmers have a right to sell too.
Right. It was just fascinating to me how long that one particularly sat there with everything else going on around it. I mean, what Peter's bent around it, and just like it was all commercial all around it. It was just sitting there waiting. And then it finally did.
We need to do, in my opinion, we need to do 100 times better and more proactive job at getting ahead of infrastructure and growth. But there's one single issue that has always prevented it in Knox County, and I've been very vocal about this. It's that nobody wants to have the discussion about tax rate and property tax rate. It's been 23 years now, it'll be 24 soon, since we've had a property tax rate, because for 24 years, every politician has said, elect me, I'll never raise your taxes. Now, what they haven't said is, they haven't whispered over the side, says, don't worry about me running up your credit card. Because Knox County has $650 something million in debt on an $850 million budget. So our third largest budget expenditure in Knox County is debt. First is schools, second is public safety, third is debt. So we spend $73 million every year just to keep the credit cards whole.
Okay, so but then that runs back into the baseball conversation. If we got money to spend on that.
Yeah, but the difference in the baseball stadium, the baseball project or the stadium project, is that we're not adding balance sheet debt. We're not issuing debt on our books to pay for that we're servicing. The sports entity itself issues its own debt, and we just guarantee it. So if the whole thing went belly up, sure, we'd be liable for it, but we're not actually taking out new bonded debt to pay for that. The way the financial means it structures is it uses its own taxing authority and its own footprint to basically use the revenues to fund itself.
Right, because the special tax district,
like a co-signer on the loan.
Right, but that special tax district, I don't know. We don't have to. We'll save this for a later date when it gets a little bit more public, because I don't know if it's worth going into.
Look, we haven't seen the whole financing plan yet, so it's hard to argue over numbers when you don't have all the numbers yet. So that's sort of down the process. But as a community, we just have to decide what it is we want our community to look like. And you can't ever say things are never going to change. And you can't ever say things are never going to be more expensive. You can't just, there's a balancing act to that.
Right. It killed Reagan when he promised no taxes and did it anyway. And so, I guess the follow up to me is: do we do an annual audit of some sort? Is there some sort of public?
Oh yeah, we do. We probably do 30 different audits every year of every level of government. We actually, Knox County has its own audit department, and that's all they do is, and then we have outside of auditors as well that do financial audits. So we have internal checks and balances, we have external checks and balances, and they audit literally everything from the baseline financials all the way to like a specific department. They'll look at, audits of different policies, procedures, equipment, that kind of thing.
Right, because one of the things, because I'm much more generally a libertarian, and so I'm right on the edge of that taxation is theft theology. But for me personally, it's more of a if I feel good about where my money's going, I'm not going to complain about it.
Yeah,
that's kind of how I stand on it. And so to pitch I'm District 4. Todd Frohmeyer ran for District 4. He came in and talked about it. And he's the only person that I talked to going into the election that was vocally saying, I think we need to raise property taxes. And I was like, all right, tell me why. And if you can give me a good reason why, then I'm not going to complain about it. And so that's kind of where I'm at on the taxes thing. And so, again, I'm not opposed to the raising property tax. It's just, I don't know how to make that, I don't know how to make that evaluation on whether I agree that our tax dollars are getting spent well. I've gone it on.
Well, I think that splits into two things. What is the rate, what's appropriate, and what it is you're using it for. See, to me, being a fiscal conservative, to me, and I think it used to mean was spend the money wisely for the greatest impact, be good stewards of the money, and make sure you have good investments that will pay off over time. That's to me what an ideal fiscal conservative is. For the last 20 plus years, it has meant don't spend any money. So that's the difference between a business-minded approach and a politically minded approach. And I think that we just have to have that honest conversation and say, is an appropriate level this, or should we come up with a whole new concept like tie the tax rate to CPI or something that says as the normal world of inflation, goes up and the cost of goods, so does this. We just have to have an honest conversation. And I think the problem is we don't ever really want to have that honest conversation because it's all about, will you elect me next time?
Right. And I think, because that's one of the things that I'm struggling with is trying to figure out, I'm trying to figure out how to build a scorecard for a commissioner. Not once you're in the commission, but a scorecard for the campaign trail that says, I just mentioned Todd, so I'll say Todd runs again in 24 for District 4 and stuff like that. And he goes out and he has his public stance on X, Y, Z, what he wants to do. He's in favor of raising taxes to do X, Y, and Z with it. And how to build a scorecard that says, okay, this is him on issue A, B, and C. Because one of the things that I'm learning as I'm doing this is that the Knox County School Board is all but a separate entity in and of itself inside the county. Absolutely,
and it's structured in a way that is always a lose-lose for us as commissioners, as you as taxpayers, because what people don't understand is our school system is a function of the state. It's not a function. It is a state school system administered locally.
Right.
And so we can't tell them what to do. We give them a check, and that check might as well be a blank check.
Right. Because the joke was that, we could present our budget to the commission. The commission can approve the budget because they pretty much have to. And then the next day we flip that budget around and do whatever we actually want to.
Exactly. I actually think a better and so we always are the villains because we hate kids and teachers, and if you don't give us more money, then,
I'm going to trim that out and I'm going to put that in quotes and send it out there to the real world.
Yeah. And so I think it's a lose-lose situation. I actually think that it would be really interesting to have the conversation about should the school board have its own taxing authority, so it's directly responsible to the people. It sets the rate of here's what we think public education is necessary to spend, and you have to pay that. And if you don't believe we're doing a good job, then you can elect us, or vote us out. But right now they get to blame us, which I think is a really bad system.
Well, because I think, we talk about how important local politics is and how little coverage it gets. The school board is a step down from that. I mean, we had one school board on this last election, and the only reason I think it made the news was because the person who was the incumbent got elected into commission,
Yeah.
And so it was a short run election because that commissioner had to vacate
Sure.
that
And
seat.
that's a $500 million every year.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's our number one budgetary expense in the county, and it seems to get the least coverage and conversation about most other things. Like as a parent, I have kids in the school system. I'm trying. I had Ron McPherson on. I haven't published that one yet. I apologize, everybody. But I had Ron McPherson on a couple months ago, and I was just talking budget. And I'm trying to understand like, because the conversation about schools is always more money, more money, more money, and it's like, well, okay, but is that actually the problem? And so, like, again, I like to go back to the scorecard, which is where I started with this, like, because a lot of people run on schools, and it's like, well, how much can you do as a county commissioner when you're saying you want to do well for the schools? Because, like, I had a conversation, we have what, two elementary schools getting built or getting. We have two elementary schools getting a lot of work done right now, and it's like, was that a commission decision or was that a school board decision?
There's Lonsdale, Adrian Burnett, and then there's a new one being built in sort of Deep West.
Right, but and is that a commission? Is that a commission as part of the growth plan decision, or is that a school board decision?
Both.
Right, because I understand some of that's trying to allocate resources that the county has, whether it's land, like property and stuff like that. And so, like, that's where I get really confused. It's like, because who do I, because again, the fiscal conservative part of me is like, you start with the biggest spender and figure out if they're spending the right amount of money. And if they're cool, we move on to the next thing and we move on down the list. And so the biggest spender is Knox County Schools. And again, talking about how convoluted stuff gets, the schools actually respond to the state more than they do locally because of the way it's structured. And it's like, well, do I get to yell at you guys about
a 7-part series on this and never scratch the surface? It is so complicated.
And that in and of itself is the problem to me as the constituent, is that it's so complicated that for me, an amateur journalist trying to get into this thing and trying to at least have a framework of understanding so that I can then write something out or present a show specifically on the topic, I can't connect the dots. There's too many dots, and it's a connect the dots thing where there's not numbers on it.
Yeah, but if you had the bandwidth, you could, or if a group of people had the bandwidth. I mean, I co-chaired the Joint Education Committee for the last 2 years, and there were amazing conversations that we went through and understood what is the BEP formula from the state, what is the local resources, what's the makeup of our school system, how many schools do we need, what's the facility footprint. I mean, we have a 60,000 person school system. It's massively huge. Is it too big? It should be broken up into multiple groups. I mean, on and on and on and on you go. There's a lot of great conversations of that, but the answer isn't always no to everyone. It's also not always yes. It's somewhere in the middle. So, do schools need more funding? The answer is yes, in a lot of ways, with a whole lot of asterisks of, but what are you going to use it for? There's 100 things about how we have to have a city school system and a county school system, and a city school system, got sort of put into the county, and those are the most dilapidated buildings and the hardest and most neighborhoods. And, like I said, you could have a 7-part series and it would be fascinating because it's a little bit of everything.
Right.
The key is, what's the next decision you have to make that will sort of help move it in one direction or the other? This is a giant ocean liner, all of government.
Right. Well, and again, like you said it probably best is that just out of that giant ocean linerness, it's reactionary. It doesn't matter if we could see the iceberg in the distance. It doesn't matter until it's big enough that we know that iceberg is a threat before we steer the ship a little bit left or right, because we have too many little things going on right now that we're focused on until we get there. And so I guess one of my concerns is that we're not, we're too busy plugging holes and we're missing the big picture. Because
sometimes,
right, and
this is all about who you elect and which way do you want to nudge the community. So you got to think about the ocean liner as Knox County, whether it's the schools or the county or the government or whatever. You got to decide if the captain and the crew are the ones that are going to steer it in the right direction. Nothing happens fast, but you gotta start somewhere, and that starts with it was interesting. Our former planning, it used to be called MPC, but our former planning director, Gerald Green, in his parting presentation to commission, he said, he quoted a Beatles song that said, if you don't know where you're going, then any road will do. And it was sort of a dig on Knox County of, guys, you don't know, tell me a vision. What's the vision? Where are you going, and what do you do to funnel into that vision? I would say that it's hard to find somebody in Knox County, hard to find 10 people in Knox County that know what the unified vision is, that of things we're going to do between now and the next 6-8 years that's going to have a fundamental impact on the next 60 to 80 years.
Right.
You can have projects. That's different from a vision.
Right.
And we don't really have a shared collective vision right now of where we're heading.
Right. And again, to go back and promote my Metro idea is that you have two different governing bodies that neither have a full vision, and let alone a combined vision for the county as a whole. So I'm immensely fascinated.
Don't get about it. It is, there's all kinds of opportunity to nudge it. I mean, we're in a community that's not so big that you can't nudge things in a direction that is going to have a significant positive change. If we lived in Atlanta or Nashville or, Chicago, I would say maybe you're just a cog in a machine. But we're in this unique middle-sized city where you have enough resources to really do something, but it's not so big you can't get involved. And one or two people could really nudge a community in a significant way.
I don't know if I can handle that responsibility. It might be too much for me.
But a little. I mean, look. A basic example of one project I did before I got into being a public, official in a regular capacity here as commissioner. A private initiative with a core group of people. We brought the ice rink back down to Market Square. Okay, it was Scott Schimmel came to me and said, "Wouldn't this be great? We used to have one a long time ago. You play hockey." About ice rinks, figure it out. And I'm a producer. I'm a film and television producer by trade. And my brain works to figure out the project. And a small group of us put it together. My wife and I funded it, for the first several years. And it was a catalyst for bringing people around Market Square during the holidays. It fundamentally transformed that atmosphere and those businesses and helped propel an entire festival around the holiday season. And we did that, and then we gave it back to the city and said, here's a great tradition, keep it alive. Okay? Right. That was all done privately. And we nudged the city in a really unique way at a time where we needed to get more people to go downtown and spend money. Right. So that's one little project, but there's 1,000 of those all around the county, and people who are digging their heels in. You just got to decide if you want to nudge it or complain about it.
Right. And I would say that right. But I would say that traditionally I'm the no, stop doing stuff guy, but I'm quickly getting more open to let's shotgun approach this, and let's throw as many things out as we can, and if a couple of them stick and long term becomes a good thing, then it's worth it. It's worth the effort to explore.
I'd rather make 10 decisions knowing 3 are going to be fundamentally wrong and adjust those 3, and then make 10 more and 10 more and 10 more and try to innovate fast than to be the community that sits around thinking about 3 decisions and one's wrong, and then takes too long to figure it out. And I can't said this before. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So if you don't like what's happening, you got to either get involved and have a seat at that table and make your voice heard, or get out of the way. I mean, that you can't just sit around and complain about everything. I tell people all the time, they're like, "Well, how come this happened?" It's like, well, because you didn't run for office. Right. You didn't show up at that meeting. You didn't tell me what you thought.
Right, because one day we'll have so much community involvement that we got to do commission meetings at Thompson instead of in the city county building because so many people want to come.
I hope not. No, but I mean, it matters. I tell you what, it matters when we get a phone call from a constituent and not just a form email that 100 other people have sent us the exact same thing. It makes a difference.
Right.
It really
and I'm a proponent of, if you have a yes or a no, at least put something behind it. Don't just say, "Hey, Larsen, no." They say, "Hey, no, Larsen, no, I think this is a misspending," and just put a little bit of body to it. Don't just give a yes or no, because some random person like me may have an insight that you or the commission hasn't thought of. And
absolutely, I would say that when we start a discussion, it's pretty rare that, at least for me, I won't speak for my colleagues. It's pretty rare for me to have a predetermined notion of how I'm going to do before I start hearing arguments. I mean, I really try to listen to both sides. I really try to understand. I have some core beliefs and philosophies and things like that. But if you have something that helps me change my mind, okay, tell me what it is. Convince me. Give me your argument. there have been things where I thought this was an easy decision, and somebody's called me and said, "This is way more complicated than you think." Okay, and I have totally
Right.
reversed course.
Yeah, that's where I was on the beginning of the baseball discussion. I was like, I think it's stupid. It's my money. I don't want to spend it there. And then the more I've looked into it, the more I've talked to different people about it, the more I'm like, okay, I'm willing to have a real conversation about this and start once we get there, start looking at real numbers and then voice my opinion off of the more reality of what's in front of me, because there are things that make sense to me about doing it. The further I get into it, that where my initial was just like, no, there's no point in government having anything to do with sports. That's a separate private entity thing and blah, blah, blah. And so then it's like, well, no, okay, I get it. I see some spaces here. And so, and I think that's one of the things that, like you said well earlier, is that, it's more about the win than it is the philosophy. It's more about the win than whether it is a good or not for the community. And I think people need to start getting more comfortable with detaching their competitiveness, I guess, for lack of a better word, from the conversation. It's who's the win for, maybe is a better way to say it. Is it a win for me or is it a win for us? And I need to take the win away from myself. And even if I lose a little bit, but if it's a grand win, it's going to still be a win for me long term.
Yeah, I think it was Winston Churchill said, you can get a whole lot done if you don't worry about who gets the credit. And, I think that if we spent more time thinking about what are the long-term ripple effects, I try to look at my decisions on commission of what is this going to do 10 or 20 or 40 years from now? If we spent less time worrying about me and what does it do for our community, we would, oh my gosh, the amount of work we would get done. We have a really small, very vocal minority of people that wake up every day trying to figure out how to criticize, how to say no, how to pick on people, how to demonize public officials. And if we only ever listened to them, we would never do anything.
Right.
Ever.
Right.
And at some point we got to step back and say, let's look at the whole argument and figure out what are the pros and the cons and what is more valued and weighted. If something we can make a decision is better 20 years from now because we made a, tough decision today, then that maybe is that value, way more than the other value. And I think we got to have more dialogue and less firing cannons over the wall at each other.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think the number one thing that should be taking up the most air is this growth planning. I think that's really what we need to, I think that should be what the focus is. And that's going to be my new pitch as I talk to more people. Is I think because I hadn't heard that 200,000 plus in the next decade or so number yet.
I'll send you the report.
I mean, I believe it. I mean, I believe it just because of what I see already. And like I said, my realtor friend and my friend trying to buy a house and all the different stuff going on. I fully believe it. And I'm in a neighborhood that hasn't changed in 20, 30 years, and the main roads that are around me are as old as I am, and stuff like that. And to know that coming down the pipeline, even in my neighborhood, there's going to be a 20 to 50% increase in population. We can't handle it the way it is, and I really don't want to live in that 10-year block where we're trying to make up for it instead of being prepared for it. And so I think that's a valid thing that I think we need to. I'm going to make a point into making a bigger discussion, and hopefully the community at large can look into that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'll send you that report. It was really interesting. And, you think about Knox County as an ocean liner and growth as the speedboats. They're going to move a lot faster and a lot different directions, and and we can only kind of steer.
Right, and we got to figure out which of those speedboats to aim our cannons at, to take them out, and then which ones to bring over as part of our flotilla.
That's right.
That's a solid metaphor. Just blowing up speedboats. I like it.
You got you're awake now. You got your solid
I'm starting to. The coffee's kicked in. I'm starting to get together. So now that I'm functionally here, I think we're going to call it a show. Unless you have something specific you want to get out before we finish.
No. I think I appreciate the time and discussion. I think any one of the things that we discussed could have been a whole nother show with a whole nother opportunity to talk to different people on both sides. So I would love to encourage you to, find particular subject and bring people from both sides together and have more dialogue.
It's one of the ones I'm working on with baseball right now. Like I said, I had the Nats guy on. It seems like you kind of fall under the pro camp that you want the stadium and you're comfortable with funding. But I'm looking for some other people that specifically to come in and pitch the tax funding to me, and we're kind of wading water to keep the aquatic metaphors rolling. We're kind of wading water, waiting to see the actual proposal in place before we really have a conversation. Because right now we're talking in abstracts, and it's a little bit It's easy to run down the rabbit hole of, well, here's all these other communities that failed and here's all these other communities that succeeded. But it's like, well, we don't know which plan as ours is going to look like, so let's not dive too deep into know yet when we don't know what we're actually trying to do, other than we know there's a baseball stadium. That's all we really know right now.
Well, and also remember, it's more than just baseball. I'm trying to remind everybody, this is a stadium project, and this is a civic furniture project. Yes, the anchor tenant is baseball.
Right. Well, one of my pitches when I was talking to a buddy of mine where I accidentally changed my own mind was, I was like, hey man, would you pay, because I did the math on what we were estimating or whatever. And I was like, would you pay $20 a year to have the option to go to baseball downtown? And he's like, no, I don't really like baseball. I was like, well, would you pay 20, maybe $30 a year to have the option of a really good big concert coming downtown that you could go to and see in this baseball stadium? It's like, maybe. I like going to concerts. And if as you do the math out on how much of a percentage and how much it would actually come out of pocket theoretically as it goes on, it's like, yeah, I'd pay $30 a year to have some big, nice concerts come and have a nice venue to go see them in and have a nice, set of, businesses around it to go and get dinner beforehand and stop and have a beer afterwards and that kind of stuff. So really what we need to, here's my pitch to you to finish. You got to do this before your term ends. I want to move the government out of the city county building, tear that down and put a new civic there. And then we need light rail. Those two things, go.
Okay, I'll get on that. Let me get a sticky note to add that to my list of commission things. No, look, you're on the right track. What does our civic furniture look like? It's like calling the Thompson Bowling Arena the basketball stadium. It's just so much more.
Right.
This community is so much more. We got to decide what it is that attracts people here, keeps people here, has them there spending their money here. I was part of Knoxville early on when the downtown was a ghost town, and
I remember that. Yep.
The heartbeat of our community was dead. And look at it today. I've seen growth and opportunity in every part of the community, and I even see opportunity, out in the rural areas where people they have better jobs, they have better education, they have better opportunity. We got to just decide what it is we want as a community, and get together and start dreaming a little bit,
right?
And stop just saying mediocre's okay. I'm sort of tired of mediocre's okay.
Yeah, I agree with that too. But that reminded me of one of my little pushbacks about the baseball stadium is I honestly, the joke about replacing city county building just because it's such a beautiful spot to put something cool on and just have the boring government building right there. Even though it's a cool looking building. But that's one of the things that kind of that does rub me a little raw about the baseball stadium is I think if we had a better civic because that to me has more multi-use long-term positives with or without the Ice Bears in it than a baseball stadium being so specific built. But I don't want to reopen that conversation we were trying to close down. So, but just something to throw in on the food for thought thing is that's one thing that I do think we are missing as a community is that civic is falling apart, and we need a better place that isn't part of the university, in my opinion, to hold items like that. Even though we have booze in Thompson now, and that makes it a little better.
Well, there's lots of opportunity. There's no shortage of it. We hopefully are building a community that's a little bit less risk adverse and a little bit more, dreamers about where we're going to be, not what we have been.
Right.
And so I'm excited to be part of where are we heading, not what happened 30 years ago.
I like it a lot. Do you have any contacts you want to get out, your email or your Facebook page if anybody wants to do it?
I have a constituent dedicated webpage that I personally maintain and pay for. It's just larsenj.com. You can sign up for a monthly digital newsletter where I just keep people informed of what I'm doing and certain things that I think are important in the community. And then, it has all the events and committees and all the things that I'm involved in, and my contact information with the county. And pick up the phone, give me a call, invite me to things. I always tell people 100% of things I'm not invited to, I do not attend. That is a fact. And if you do not tell me, I cannot add your voice to the table. So get involved. It's not very hard to get to know your elected officials. We're all very open and transparent and available to be engaged with. You just got to decide you want to be part of the conversation.
Right. And like you said, you are an at-large. Yes, very much. Be nice. But, and like you said, he's an at-large.
If we disagree, just be nice even if we disagree.
But being an at-large means he's actually your commissioner even if he's not in your district. Even though
everywhere
right.
from Torrington to Farragut, from Hardin Valley to South Knox. If you are in Knox County, then I'm happy to help.
Right, but realistically, at the end of the day, you could, like, I'm in District 4. I could still go talk to Courtney or Dacia, you know, that. But functionally, and the way our commission is structured, Biggs and Jay are both your personal commissioner as well as whatever your district in. That's the way it's designed. So, you know, the plea is to don't feel like they're not your commissioner, so you shouldn't talk to them. But Biggs and Jay specifically, you should talk to because they are your commissioner. I've got outro music, and we'll call it a day. Thank you so much for coming, Larsen, Jay, everybody. We did it. We talked about lots of stuff, which is exciting because we've been so bogged down in baseball and Board of Health that we got out of that, and I think we discovered and nailed the real issue is we need to really start focusing on growth and what we want to do with it instead of just adjusting to it as on the fly. So we're almost agreement at gmail.com, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. I'll put his Facebook, or not his Facebook page, but I'll put that website in the show notes. If you need anything, reach out to us, reach out to him. We're going to keep going. I'm slowly working my way through the whole commission, and then I'm going to start doing the city council after that. And then the big goal is getting either one of the mayors. They're too big and important to me, but I'm going to push until I get one. We thank everybody for listening. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.